Welcome back to another episode of Folsom Inside with Gul Khan. My name is Gul Khan. The purpose of this podcast is to make sure that we bring all the major issues or the good things about Folsom. We highlight them and then we bring those things to you as the resident of Folsom. Over the past few months, there has been a lot of discussion about different topics that we have for this election. And since we are now less than 2 weeks away from the election, some of the hot topics are there. We invited one of the proponent of Major G, who actually was part of the Citizens Take Action Committee. And he came onto our session over here, and then he talked about why Major G is important and advocated that we should actually say yes to Major G. There are, however, people and the citizens who have a different opinion as well. And I feel this is important, that the citizens should have access to the information from both sides. They should have they should know exactly what are the pros and cons. So for that purpose, we invited Sarah on our show today. Sarah, thank you very much for joining. And part of the committee was saying no on Major G. And we will ask her why no on Major G. However, before we go into that one, welcome to our show, and thank you very much for taking your time. I want to know, before we jump on to the actual topic about you. Can you give us maybe a brief history there? Who you are, how long you've been in Folsom, how you got involved?
Sure. So my name is Sarah Norberg. I am the secretary of the Citizens Against the Folsom Tax Initiative No on Measure G. But I consider Folsom my hometown. My dad is a retired correctional officer at Old Folsom Prison. I work there now like a social worker, benefit worker. I help inmates who are getting out soon signing up for certain health care benefits. So I consider Folsom a great place. And yes, there are budget needs, but we don't think Measure G is the right answer to that. I got involved because I felt like there needed to be that alternative perspective. That's not the only way to tackle the budget issues.
Great. All right. So, Sarah, let's jump on to the actual topic, the elephant in the room. You just briefly touched on the budget. So, do you know where we are in terms of our budget balancing? And we just recently adopted our budget. And if you can just talk about a little bit budget consideration and how do you think that is aligned with?
Sure. So my understanding is by law, the city cannot run a deficit or not balance its budget. And so in order to balance the budget, they either need to make cuts, raise taxes, or both. Measure G proposes a 1 cent on the dollar, but they like to style it as a 1% increase. To raise the sales tax from 7.75% to 8.75% amounts to a 12.9% increase in the tax rate for the sales tax. So they like to say it's 1 cent on the dollar, technically sure, but it represents a really significant increase in the sales tax rate. And we feel like there are better ways to go about addressing budget issues. I would support a 0.5 cent increase that's temporary, not indefinite, because the way Measure G was written, there is no sunset clause or off-ramp language. A whole nother ballot initiative would be necessary. You'd have to gather at least 5,000 signatures. You need a lot of money. That's why we're calling it a permanent tax increase, because of how onerous it would be to get rid of it if it does pass. So my understanding is, even though there are projected shortfalls in the revenue coming in relative to costs, we don't need a whole cent on the dollar increase, and it doesn't have to be permanent.
Great. Yep. And this is, everyone knows it's only 1 cent. And you brought about, how much is that, 12%?
12.9% increase in the rate between 7.75 and 8.75%.
Yeah. Okay.
And so even though you may not notice that day to day, on big ticket items, I foresee people going out of town to make big ticket purchases. They're building a new Costco in El Dorado Hills. There are people who are going to say it's more convenient to go to the new Costco and to buy those big appliances rather than staying at our Costco, for example. So not that you'd see it every day, but we feel like it would drive some business away.
Great. Okay. And how much money total that you think is going to be collected as part of it?
The city and the people behind Measure G estimate it will bring in $29 million a year. I don't know how they did the math because that seems like a lot. It would be 27% of the city's operating budget just in Measure G funds, if that's accurate. I don't think they're accounting for people changing their shopping habits or buying more things online or buying big ticket items out of town. But what they estimate is $29 million a year, yet they project something like $15 million now, and within 5 years, we would have an enormous surplus if that $29 million is correct.
Okay. So that's a good question because we have about $5.25 million budget structural deficit that is expected in the next 5 years as per the recent budget and that the manager proposed. And I asked this question to Bruce Klein as well, that if we just need $5.25 million, why do we have to raise $29 million?
I don't think we have to. I think that's a fair question. That's why, assuming we are successful defeating Measure G, I'm going to talk to local people and ask, what is a reasonable tax that you could agree to that's not a whole cent on the dollar, but half a cent, for example? They also only allocate 20% each to police and fire. 40% is less than half, yet public safety is in the name. I would support a tax where much more than half goes to police and fire. So I would like to see much bigger chunks of the pie for public safety if there were a follow-up tax. And I'm a problem solver. Even though officially Citizens Against the Folsom Tax Initiative is just focused on defeating Measure G, the day after the election, if it is defeated, I want to be a problem solver who finds a way to have a half cent, for example, and for 5 years, not indefinite. There are ways to do a tax that are more palatable that can actually win the votes necessary to be passed.
Great. And what you think is going to be the impact? You briefly touched on the cost goal, but what do you think overall on our businesses? What's going to be the impact?
It's hard to say because the yes side claims that people don't make changes to their shopping habits based on 1% increase, but there are enough conservatives I've talked to who say they will shop out of town out of spite. And that's the last thing we want. Shopping local is very important. So I don't know how accurate that is, but I wouldn't want to alienate people by forcing this tax down our throats. Another thing that really bothers us about Measure G, by being quote-unquote citizen-initiated, because Bruce Klein, Robert Goss are citizens, it doesn't take into account how they're retired city staff, so they do have their CalPERS pensions on the line. It's not like a disinterested third party like me who's never worked for the city. Still, by being citizen-initiated, that's how they bypass the 2/3 requirement to pass this tax. Normally, you need 2/3 voter approval. I would like to see a tax that can withstand that scrutiny of 2/3, because if we make the moderating suggestions, a half cent, not a full cent, 3 to 5 years, not permanent, more allocated to police fire, not 20% each, I feel like it should be doable to pass that if we collaborate more with the community. The way Measure G feels like to me is they consulted their stakeholders, Folsom Athletic Association, Fire Union, these big players that stand to gain from the current tax, and they didn't really talk to the rest of the public on what's important to you. Otherwise, they would have allocated more to police and fire, for example.
Okay. And do you think that police and fire and the Parks and Rec, they have actually endorsed it? The unions have endorsed it?
The fire union endorsed Measure G, other public sector unions with the city of Folsom, but the police union stayed neutral. And we can't speak for them. They believe like we do, 20% for police is insufficient. So that's why if there is a new tax effort, which I'm happy to help advocate for as soon as Measure G is hopefully defeated, I would like to see much more than 20% each for police and fire, like 30 or more, I think is much better.
Okay. And that's, you believe that we need 30% or more because we need to hire more police officers, and public safety is a bigger issue right now.
Sure. They mentioned the need for additional fire stations and fire equipment. For example, on the fire side, they like to point out we have fewer police today than we did in 2008 when they first did layoffs. But what's not clear is the police understaffing a recruitment morale issue or a money issue or both? I believe it's more recruitment morale that they have an easier time hiring firefighters because they're not demonized like police are. And I would want to convey, my father is a retired correctional officer. I'm always going to support law enforcement. And I do feel like that might be the bigger challenge is attracting staff and keeping them, not really the pay itself.
Great. Okay. Do you think that this overall increase in our tax increase, is that going to impact buying habits of the people other than just going out of town to buy something? For example, people have been buying online. Sales tax has gone down because of the reason that we don't have enough sales tax collected and people have started buying online more. Do you think that's going to change?
No, and I think we need to grapple with the reality that buying online is the future and the present. So rather than try to find ways to circumvent that trend, we should lobby Sacramento and the state that more sales tax would go back to the city like it did prior to the pandemic, and more of online purchases by Folsom residents should come back to Folsom. Our understanding is when you purchase online, we're getting half of that sales tax back and the rest is either state or county. We should fix that, but that's a bigger thing to advocate for. Our treasurer, Gary, is an accountant, and he's argued with the city manager, hey, I will help you advocate for these policy changes because we should be recouping our sales tax by Folsom residents, even if it is online. That's a much bigger issue, but I'm the kind of person that likes to work hard at public policy, and I would try to help win those fights too.
That is true. I also raised that point many times that we need to have an advocacy at the state and local government level and go over there and get our fair share of the sales tax that we need.
Right.
So let's talk about a little bit on the where you are agreeing with them. So what I'm understanding is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you are for a smaller portion of the sales tax increase, like 0.5% or something.
I am. And I should be clear, I, Sarah Norberg, Folsom resident, would totally support a temporary 0.5 cent, and by temporary I mean 3, 5, something with an end date, sales tax increase that's only 0.5 cent, not a full cent, and more of it going to police and fire. And also, I would remove the Citizens Oversight Committee because I'd rather have city council who we elect be responsible for the funds, not some unelected, bureaucracy. Like the Citizens Oversight Committee is a lot of city staff. Why would we have city staff who are receiving the money say where it should go? I think that's inherently conflicted of interest. So as a citizen, yes, I will totally advocate for a lesser tax that is not permanent. And that's why we've given the Yes Sanji people such a hard time. If they really wanted the community to come on board, why would they not write sunset end date language? It's inherently alienating, whereas a lot of people can agree, hey, maybe we need a little money for a time, but not forever.
And that's true that once the taxes go up, they never go down. So if we don't have a sunset clause, then it means it's going to stay there forever. So that's one of the bigger concern people have as well. Right now, do you have an idea that how they are planning to actually create an oversight committee if this is passed?
Yeah, that multiple of those seats would be filled by city staff, and it's not like your everyday citizen who has no connection to the city comprising the 9-member board, and that it's city council appointed, to my understanding. I feel like we elect city council people, and yes, they would consult with city departments, but why would you create a whole separate oversight committee when the only elected representatives are the city council themselves? So that's my own perspective. I'm not speaking, this is the official position of the Citizens Against the Folsom Tax Initiative, but we have pointed out that we see conflict of interest all over Measure G, the construction of the Citizens Oversight Committee. A lot of the people behind it are retired city employees who do have their pension on the line. So even though they're careful to say none of Measure G will go to pension, well, money's fungible. So the rest of the budget will service the pension and G will just service other purposes, those 6 purposes in their pie chart. So we feel like there's just too many problems. We would like to see more police fire and more of a collaborative process of what should those wish list priorities be and how much should go to them, and a tax that would not be indefinite for sure.
Got it. And one of the things that the question I asked earlier to Bruce as well, that how's this sales tax measure is different from the other neighboring cities, that how much El Dorado Hills is charging, how much Rancho Cordova is charging, because I know Rancho Cordova has been through this phase as well. What's your thoughts on that?
He likes to say Elk Grove has done it, Rancho Cordova has done it, it's our turn. Just because they've mismanaged their money and felt the need to raise taxes on themselves doesn't mean it's a good idea to jump on the bandwagon. And it will put us at a competitive disadvantage. The way we're located in the county, just across the street practically from El Dorado County, from Placer County, El Dorado Hills, and Granite Bay, their sales tax rate are lower anyway because they're in other counties. Once we go up a whole percentage more, I feel like it will dissuade Granite Bay, El Dorado Hills people from coming here to shop, and it will move us Folsom shoppers increasingly out of town, at least here and there. Maybe not on a significant level, but I don't want to do anything to discourage local shopping.
Okay. So now the big question that I asked to every single council member, and I asked every single proponent of Citizen State Action Committee, and I'm asking you as well, that if this does not pass, as you are suggesting and you're advocating right now, how would we overcome the problems that we have? We are talking about $5.25 million structural deficit in the next 5 years. We're talking about $1.2 million in the next 1 year as well. And we are planning to hire more police officers. We don't have money for that one yet. We have about $20 million worth of deferred maintenance for Parks and Rec. So all that requires money. One of the argument was that the quality of life in Folsom is going to go down if we don't pass this fund, if we don't have money. What are your thoughts on that?
A few things. One, the current city manager is retiring, and I would like to hire someone who is willing to do a very thorough, exhaustive look at the numbers and cut things that truly are not necessary before we ask residents to pay more in taxes. So I think the leadership overhaul with a new city manager could help. But even just that issue, at the final fiscal budget town hall a few weeks ago, I directly asked the city manager, look, I understand they gave you a 10% increase you didn't ask for. That put her salary at $290,000, just salary. That's more than the governor makes, which I felt like needed to be voiced, that's unreasonable. And when they posted her vacancy, they didn't lower the salary back down. They kept it at $290,000. So how can the city cry that it needs money and continue to post her vacancy at $290,000? So if they're serious, they would lower it down to $250,000, $230,000. Other people have said, oh, you want to lower it to $100,000. No, I don't. That's being hyperbolic, but it doesn't have to stay at $290,000. That's just one example. We feel like there's a lot of over expenditure, overextension. As it is, we have 48 parks, and with the continual development, more parks will need to be built, yet some parks are dilapidated. We should focus on fixing our current parks before building new ones. But how I would articulate it is, assuming Measure G were to be defeated, I'm the first person who's going to say we need to have some sort of community powwow to say those who are open to a tax, under what circumstances will you vote for a tax? If it's 5 years, if it's half a cent, if more is allocated to police fire, if we do something better than that 9-member citizen oversight committee that's mostly City of Folsom employees. It has to be a collaborative process, because the way Measure G is felt are all these retired city staff from on high with their technocratic elitist expertise telling us peons how it should go. And I resent that, Just because I don't have their legal background and training doesn't mean I'm not an intelligent person who can put forth better ideas potentially. And a real discussion would involve a back and forth and debate and hashing it out. That's how they created the Constitution, was the Constitutional Convention in the 1700s. If we need to do something like that to find the tax that meets the needs, but does not overdo it with $29 million a year, so be it.
Okay, good. That's a fair statement. You explained that exactly what will happen if Measure G does not pass. What I'm understanding is that we can still survive. We just need to make few adjustments here and there, but we can still survive. The quality of life in Folsom is not going to go down. Is that a correct statement?
Well, how I would articulate it is with the right leadership, we could make cuts that don't diminish quality of life, but are still better on the budget. So I don't think it necessarily involves lowering the quality of life, to give you a direct answer.
Yeah.
But that requires really solid leadership. And I feel like the city manager refused to lay people off that maybe weren't necessary, or refused to make those difficult budget decisions that if you have a company that's underwater, you have to make key cuts to stay afloat. None of those decisions have seemed to happen, it seems. So we feel like with the right leadership, we may not need to see draconian cuts, but at the same time, I do support a temporary tax increase, not Measure G.
And that is correct. Okay. And if we are hiring another, or when we are hiring, it's not if, because our current city manager is retiring. And do you think that we have the right leadership right now in the council who can actually hire and who have experience hiring at this level of person? Because hiring a city manager means hiring a CEO of a company who has about 500 employees under her belt. Now, that CEO is responsible for the budget, for all the human resources and all the amenities and the services that are being provided. Do we have that leadership right now in the current council?
I don't know, because YK is terming out, Rosario is terming out, and going to the county. Anna, Mike, Sarah, they have some experience, but I don't know if they know what to look for in a city manager, and we don't even know who the two new people will be. So the timing being so in flux is not ideal. But my hope is with the right city manager, someone who has made cuts in a business space, who knows how to keep something solvent. Maybe that's the direction we need. Whereas my understanding is the current city manager worked for the city a long time, but I don't think she had a lot of private sector experience. So I'm hoping with new city council leadership, that might help us in the decision of appointing a new city manager.
Now, the other side, if, let's say, you are advocating for no on Measure G, one side is advocating for yes on Measure G, and if Measure G does pass, what's going to be your next step? What do you think is going to, or should be the next step?
If it does pass, which I believe it would pass narrowly, like 51-49, or, neck and neck. If it did pass, I expect it to barely pass. I feel like members of our committee will ask to consult and have some say in the sense of how do you fulfill the parameters of Measure G, how it has those 6 priorities that they want to see the funding go toward, and would really advocate for the police fire paces, that those paces be fulfilled, that the Measure G money make a significant impact to addressing the fire department's needs, to addressing the police department understaffing. And I don't know that they would be as invested in the other priorities, even though we all want great parks and trails and everything. Yeah, we haven't really thought about if it does pass, is there a way to be an accountable watchdog that the money goes where it's supposed to go? They wrote an annual audit into Measure G, but the city itself undergoes an annual audit. So I don't know if that's really any extra accountability. I feel like it may be hazy to track where the money goes. So I'll certainly continue to pay attention, but because it's so unpopular, even with the gigantic funding disparity, the Yes side has fundraised over $236,000, a lot from developers, engineering firms, the public sector unions, all these parties that stand to gain if Measure G is passed. Us in opposition, no more than $15,000, and it's everyday people like myself. No special interests. We're just people who don't want to see the tax pass. But the consensus we get talking to people on the street is that it wouldn't pass. But with such a gigantic, they've fundraised 17 times more than we have. That's why I'm nervous that it could barely squeak and pass. So either way, I'm going to stay involved. But the hope is that by defeating it, we could bring about a much more reasonable tax that's not indefinite, that's less of an impact. A whole cent on the dollar It really impacts fixed income people, low income people. That's why sales tax increases are called regressive. And that's why many progressives oppose them, because they don't want to hit the lowest income even harder.
I'm glad that you mentioned this one, because this is one of my questions has been, being a business owner myself, that regressive taxes versus progressive taxes. And a lot of people don't even know the meaning of that one and how that's going to impact. And this is going to be a regressive taxes, which is going to be applied to everyone uniformly, which means that if you make a $1.5 million a year versus if you make a $50,000 a year, you both have to pay the same 1%. What exactly has been the public support or response so far? You have been out on the streets talking to the people, and I know some of other members of your committee as well. What do you think have been so far the support or the response from the public?
It's overwhelmingly negative in theory, that they don't like the idea of a tax being quote unquote permanent, that it would be a lot of effort to get rid of it. They don't like it being a whole cent on the dollar. They would support a lesser amount, like a half cent, quarter cent, 3/4, something less than that. They don't like that there's so much money and heavy-handed fundraising behind the tax. So the informal sense you get is that it's not popular, but when you lower the threshold for passage from 2/3 to half plus 1, that's why I'm paranoid that it could still happen, and I'm a worrywart anyway. About the regressive versus progressive, so a regressive tax means it really hurts the low-income people because, right, even though the sales tax 8.75 is for everyone, if you're a lower income or fixed income person, you feel it much more acutely. So that's exactly what that means, and that's why a lot of progressives, liberal Democrats, I've delivered signs where they already have a Harris Waltz sign, not just Trump Vance or other signs on their yard. So it truly is a bipartisan thing that people feel like we can come out with a better tax. And then there are people who say no tax ever. I'm not one of those people, but some feel so distrustful of the city that they say, I'm not going to give you another dollar until you show me where the money's going and really justify it. And when they see the city manager making more than the California governor, they scoff, so we need to rebuild that trust as well.
Why do you think is the reason that? Is that the distrust on the city manager, staff, or the council?
I would say being distrustful of government, period, and it's just showing up locally. So people feel like the state squanders our taxpayer dollars and, we spend billions and billions of dollars on homelessness and there's more homeless people. So there's this real disconnect of just because you throw money at a problem doesn't make it any better. So I don't think it's particular to the city, and I don't want the city to feel like I'm putting them on blast when, they try their best. But unless you can really account for where all the money is going, it's bewildering to the average person that we're developing. We have these multi-million-dollar homes. We're building south of 50. How is it that we're out of money when we've developed so much? And that's another thing I want to stress. I feel like Measure G was brought about because we are overdeveloping too quickly. I would like to see a temporary lesser tax increase that will manage the new residents we have south of 50, but not overextend into oblivion. There are developers who want to extend our city's boundaries. We don't agree with that, and we feel like Measure G is the gasoline on the fire of overdevelopment. We would like to see all this slowed down.
Great. I have seen this. I have heard this one from a lot of other people as well while on the street. What I'm understanding is that right now we have a few things that needs to be done. The trust has to be built. Right now, the people are really distrustful on the government. And in order to hire a new city manager, which is one of the key posts that we have, we need to have someone in the council who has experience hiring at a big corporation level, people who have experience managing the big budgets, and the people who can actually be accountable for that one as well. Citizens Oversight Committee that they have proposed, if you think that's not the right way to do, and then we have only the people, the council member who are elected, they should be responsible for that. How do you think is going to be the composition of that Oversight Committee? Is that all the members should be part of that one? How should they do?
Well, this is all theoretical because we don't have an alternative tax that already drafted. So this is just spitballing what a new tax could look like. I feel like the way they constructed the Citizen Oversight Committee, being so many City of Folsom employees, is inherently conflicted because the parties you're allocating the money to should say where it goes. We don't elect those department heads, we elect the city council. So I do feel it would be better to empower the city council to oversee whatever temporary tax increase that we vote into law. And now that your city council, whoever gets elected, not only oversees the regular budget, but the supplemental funds and has the power to actually address those deferred maintenance needs and other priorities. So personally, I don't think we need that Citizen Oversight Committee the way they drafted it, but because we're so focused on defeating Measure G and then we'll turn to solutions as soon as the election's over, I haven't given it really in-depth thought yet. But it is really important that everyone voting in Districts 2 and 4 understand who their candidates are with, like you're pointing to, having that perspective that we're going to have to pick a new city manager and you need people in those vacancies for city council who can pick a good city manager for sure.
Great. So the devil is in the detail. The execution of this whole money management is the most important thing right now. Right. The way I see is, yes, even if this passes or fails, either way, you have to manage that. You have to manage the new hiring. You have to manage the budget as well. So, and especially how the execution is going to go. So thank you very much for shedding the light on that. One last question, not question actually. I'll give you about 30 seconds. You directly look in the camera and then you can directly talk to the citizens of Folsom. Pretty much everyone is voting on that one in the next less than 2 weeks now. What exactly do you want to say to them? What do you think are your thoughts, the final thought?
Sure. What I'd like to impress on Folsom voters are a few things. Measure G is one path to address the city's issues, but it's not the only one, and we don't have to assume that because former city staff wrote it, it's the best version of a tax. We can vote in a tax that's a half cent on the dollar, not a full cent, that has a time limit, not permanent, indefinite, that allocates more to fire and police, and that would have a better accountability structure than the 9-member Citizens Oversight Committee that Measure G put into writing. We can do this better. I'm a problem solver. Assuming Measure G gets defeated, I'll be the first person saying, okay, let's do a less ambitious, non-permanent tax. Who's with me? And try to have discussions to bring forth something better that could actually get the voters' approval. If you feel similarly, you can go to our website, nofolsomtax.com/volunteer is how you request a yard sign for free. I deliver them myself. The election's 2 weeks away. Please do consider us. Measure G is the very last item on the ballot. So please vote down ballot. And if you feel similarly that this tax is not right, please vote no on G. You can email us, text us, and thanks so much for your time, Gul Khan. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you very much. Thank you, Folsom residents and citizens, for being with us. We are right now at the crossroad of really making very important decisions in our life because the Folsom has been a very prosperous town. And now we are at a stage where we are looking at some structural deficit. And probably this is going to be the first time that we are looking into it. We need to make sure that we make the right decisions, whether you vote yes or no on that one. But on our YouTube channel, Folsom Insight, you can see yes on Measure G videos as well. Now this is going to be there as well. So you can look at it and then understand exactly how much it's going to cost you and how much is going to be the cost for your next generation. My name is Gul Khan. Thank you very much for being with us.